Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining my talk today. It's called Identity Crisis, Bending Sprint Security to Your Advanced Use Cases. Pretty fancy title. We're going to unpack what that means in a second. I'm going to require your participation as well at some point, so please participate. That would be nice. My name is Cristian Schuszter. I work at CERN, the particle accelerator in Geneva, a big physics lab. I've been working there for around 7 years on different computer science-y topics, let's say. You might assume that I work in construction with all the hard hats, but safety first, I come from a computer security, big data background, and so on. I worked in the SSO team of CERN for quite some time, and now I'm working more on enterprise Java software to keep things running. I'm also a CERN guide, so if you ever pass by CERN, feel free to drop me a message, and I promise we can find something for you and guide you around. Now, we're going to be talking about Spring Security, mainly some uncharted bits, some interesting things that you maybe know, maybe you don't know, or yeah, well, let's see where it goes. And we're going to be talking about OIDC, the different ways to do it, Auth, Auth2, and so on. Some new cool features that maybe are not very well documented, or maybe you don't know about them. And then we're going to be live coding a user impersonation feature. So basically, I want to become somebody else inside my own application. How do I do that using Spring Security 6+, right? If you want the code, I already put a link over there. So you have the QR code. You also have cern.ch/voxed identity crisis if you figure out it's easier to remember it like that. You're going to have it on the last slide as well, so don't worry about it. But first, icebreaker. I would like you to scan this QR code and tell me what comes to your mind when you think about Spring Security. Lots of scanning of QR codes. I'm sorry for that. I promise it will be worth your time. So, did you manage to connect, any of you? Or the network is a bit flaky. Filter chain, okay. There comes in response. I think it might be limited to 50 people, so, complex, documentation, difficult, hard, basic auth, auth2, pre-authorized, JWT, user, traditional, convoluted, configuration hell. Oh, okay. We're getting there. The hive mind is starting to converge on one topic, right? So it says complex, complicated. So maybe that's why you came to the talk, right? To see if it's that complex. Magic. It could be. Air-gapped environment. I don't know what ACEGI is. Oh, okay. I'm too young for that. RBAC, okay. Deprecated. Right. Excellent. So people are spamming the like button. Let's move on. Are you ready? Because now I'm going to try to see if you're actually Spring Security experts. I know you need to return the lanyards from the conference, so I came prepared. I'm going to give you a CERN lanyard instead, so you can attach your badge to it at the end of the day, okay? But you need to be the first to answer correctly. Ready? Let's go. Question 1 of 4. 20, 31, 32, 30. Okay. I think we reached the limit. 49, 50. Okay, there we go. Answer fast to get more points. First question. Which Spring Security annotation is used to secure methods? I'm going easy on you guys. Come on. So you have enable security, @secured, @security context, and @role allowed. Cast your votes. Still have 4 seconds. 3, 2, 1. @secured, yay! 18 of you got it correct. Only? Oh, man. Oh, man. All right. So, in terms of leaderboard, Arnaut is the fastest one. So you get the keychain here. It's waiting for you on the table for when you're back. Who's Arnaut? Yay! Awesome. Next question. Ready? Even if you're not ready, I'm starting it. So, what's one key advantage of using pre-authorized over @secured in Spring Security. So we're getting into. So the first question, the first answer is pre-authorized is more concise than @secured. The second one is pre-authorized supports complex expressions and spell. The third, pre-authorized does not require Spring Security to be configured, and the fourth one is just that it's faster. Oh, that was too easy. So who was the fastest one? Snuggles. Very good, Snuggles. You get a lanyard. It's waiting here for you. Next one. What's the primary difference between Spring Starter, OAuth2 client, and OAuth2 resource server? And then I put 1 and 2 in parentheses so I don't need to repeat everything. So 1 is used for securing APIs and 2 for OAuth2 login. The second, 1 supports JWT validation. Oh my God, I don't have time to read all the things, but yes, very good. I see some competitivity going on there. Okay. Oh man, Beyonce, you were so close. Very well done, SB. You get the lanyard. And the last question. Which of the following statements about granted authority in Spring Security is true? And then you have the questions over there, right? So granted authority represents the permissions roles assigned to a user. Authorities are always predefined with role by Spring Security. You can use custom implementations, yada, 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 yada. Ah, there were multiple answers that you could have chosen. I made it easier for you. It was the last one. All right. And very well done, Jenny. There's a lanyard waiting for you for later on. All right. That was that. Thank you for participating. Let's keep going. Now that you've proven to me that at least some of you are knowledgeable on the subject, we're going to talk a bit about tier levels, right? So based on your answers from the previous quiz, it looks a bit like this, right? So like Spring Web is like this happy path, land, then there's spell, okay, it's a bit more complicated. Then Spring Security, you really need to be a Linux user for that. And then Spring AOP, you need to be a bit godlike to actually understand what's going on there. And you're not the only person which actually thinks like that. So there are people which post things like, I hate Spring Security. Like, all I have to say is holy parentheses, right? And then it's like the documentation is another beast. Every time I try to find something, it's deprecated, it doesn't work, etc., right? If you want to start from a good place, you can check out this amazing DevOps talk from Daniel. It's going to cover everything you need to know about Spring Security, starting from very basic fundamentals up to like actually understanding the latest and greatest standards. I encourage you to have a look there. So, it's easy to say that maybe Spring Security is kind of like IKEA furniture, right? It's modular, it's powerful, but the instructions are going to make you cry. That's a quote that I came up with. And one might say that the best architecture is just this, right? Like, how many of you are doing this in your day-to-day applications? Rather than focusing on configuring security inside your framework, you just delegate it to some reverse proxy or whatever, and that one is the one responsible for OAuth and all that. Who's doing that? I was expecting more hands, but okay. Maybe it's the best thing because then you deal away with the complexity. You don't need to do all this stuff that I'm going to show you. But right. So coming back to OIDC and the flavors of Auth2, Auth2, and so on, there was this question about OAuth2 client and OAuth2 resource server, right? So OAuth2 client is basically when your application is a standard server-side rendered application. You ask the user to, okay, please log in. The user gets sent to the identity provider. They send their credentials to the identity provider. You get the code back. With that code and with some credentials that you have on your side, you send it back to the identity provider confirming that everything is correct and you're actually the owner of this application, let's say. And you get back a token, right? A JWT token in this case. Hopefully. But then you also have the resource server aspect of it. So in case you ever want to build an API in Spring Boot, this is the one that you should go to, right? It's basically another filter on the filter chain, which uses well, basically it creates a bearer token authentication token, which is used by the authentication manager to check if you're allowed to do something or not. And then it puts that information from the token, it puts it into the security context and then into the authentication object and so on, right? It's a very important distinction because depending on what you need, you might use one or the other, right? The second one is more complicated if you want to do complex things there, and it's probably the most used use case because rather than having a backend rendered, thime leaf application or whatever you guys are using for server-side rendering nowadays, you can just verify that the tokens are correct, but you don't really do the authentication flow and all that with the authorization code grants and so on. Let's have a look at how this works, okay? So in the demo code, we basically have a couple of applications. We have an Auth client application, the resource server, and the impersonation one, which we're going to code more or less from scratch. I have the Auth client application running. Now, just to get you familiar with what's going on, we basically have a Keycloak instance. How many of you are using Keycloak at work? Wow, that's actually quite a lot of people. Okay, so this thing, whenever you run it, it's going to spawn a Keycloak server with some predefined configuration. You have 3 users, well, the admin one, you have Bob, and you have Alice. If I log in as the admin user, just to show you what's going on there, admin is the password, and then for the other ones, the username is also the password. I created a separate realm called app, where I have a bunch, I have my app client, basically, that I'm going to be using for the demos. And I have 2 users defined. So I have Alice and Bob. The users, they have a couple of attributes and so on. But what's interesting is that they have roles in an application, right? So this is something that comes out of the box in Keycloak. Alice is an admin and a normal user, as you can see here. And Bob is, wait a second. Bob is just a normal user, okay? That can be useful in the future, you're gonna see why. And I want to have the simplest Auth2 application possible, right? So in my security config, I basically define a filter chain, right? So basically I get the HTTP security object as a method parameter that basically is used to build the filter chain, right? You say I authorize HTTP requests, I have a Swagger UI and so on, it doesn't matter. And that's it. And then you build the filter chain, right? You're probably familiar with this. When you go to localhost 8080, oh, sorry, 8000, because 8080 is Keycloak in this instance. 403. Not good. Why is it the 403? Well, because I don't specify that I'm doing any sort of authentication mechanism in any way, right? So actually what happens here, you should be using Auth2 login. This is when the server does the initialization. So you either use a Lambda function to configure it even more as a nested thing, or customizer with defaults, and you're done with it. It's going to be redeploying in the background in a second. Come on, let's go. Oh no, but wait, did I? Wait a second. Okay. And how do you configure it in the application YAML? Well, I mean, okay, I'm connecting to the DB and so on, but the most important bit here is the security part, right? Spring security, OAuth2, this is the wrong thing. Oh, I was looking at the at the wrong application. I'm sorry for that. Security config for the Auth client. Sorry. Yes. I put it in the wrong place. Okay, now it's going to redeploy. And here I am. So now I'm logging into the app realm as Bob, for example, and the application is going to tell me what my roles are, okay? This is interesting We're going to get to that in a second, but the roles look weird, right? So I see scope email, scope OpenID, where I would expect normally to see what? Normal user or admin user or whatever, right? You're going to see what happens in a second, but OK. And for the resource server, you're basically doing more or less the same thing, but instead of saying OAuth2 login here, you're saying OAuth2 resource server, and then maybe you want to have a certain JWT authentication converter or whatever. Otherwise, you just say customizer with defaults, and it's going to work out of the box. I can prove it to you that it works. And this guy is going to be configured in a bit of a different way. So let's look at the YAMLs for a second. Auth client is this. It says OAuth2 client registration, keycloak, client ID, my app, authorization code. These are the scopes that I want to get. ID error, OK. And client authentication method none. This is weird, right? So when I say authorization code, normally I should be using a client secret as well, right, to log in. We'll get to that. And for the resource server, I just have resource server JWT issuer URI my app, basically, like app Realms app. Because I don't need to do anything. There's the well-known endpoint that the resource server uses to configure itself, right, on localhost 8080 Realms app, well-known or something. And it's going to verify that the token is actually issued by my server, right? So in this situation, I go to Swagger UI indexation. Did I? Oh, because I didn't run it. I'm sorry. OK. Because I killed it. Right, so I need to tell it in my resource server config here that the defaults are not quite OK, so I need to say server.jwt, and now it's customizer with defaults, right? So it's going to be running. I need to say that I want to use JWT tokens. You can use opaque tokens, which are basically any other kinds of tokens, but not JWT ones, right? OK, is it running? It is running. OK, so I have a nice little Swagger UI for the resource server app. Again, I log in as the server restarted, so I need to log in as Alice this time, maybe. And hello is not very interesting, but I can get the roles that I have defined in my token. Now let's see what's going on, because there's scope email, scope profile, right? This is odd. I would expect these other roles to come to me, right? So if we go to this beautiful JWT.io page and we actually decode my token, what do we have inside? Well, it says that my name is Alice, my username, preferred username is Alice. Then I have a bunch of other things, and then there's a nested JSON inside the token. This comes by default from Keycloak, saying resource access, my app, roles, and then admin and normal user. Spring Security doesn't know by default that the roles are there. Spring Security assumes that scope is actually my authorities, right? Like, what am I allowed to do? So this is not very useful in my situation. We're going to see how we can configure that in just a minute. Now, coming back to the YAML of the OAuth client, client authentication method none. Is this secure? Who thinks this is secure? Who thinks it's not secure? OK, that's the answer that I was expecting. However, public client does not mean insecure in this case. There's something from a couple of years ago from Google. It's an RFC, right? it's called proof key for code exchange by OAuth public clients. So if you can't be sure that you can, let's say, trust your clients, for example, when you're doing login from a JavaScript application in the front end, rather than just saying, okay, security is done, I can't do anything about it, people can just pretend. That's why we have redirect URIs that we allow, right, in our applications and so on. That's one way of combating, potential fraud. If you put client authentication method none, and you don't use any kind of client secret in your configuration over there, you're actually using PKC by default. So PKCE is PKC. It's pronounced like that. So it's not insecure. It's actually kind of a good idea to do that. If, for example, you don't want to give the client secret to another person that's going to be running this application, right? So it's not insecure. Now, as we have seen, those roles, they're kind of in a weird state there. So they're really nested deep inside the object. It's kind of annoying to get to them. You get the scopes inside your token, so it's not very cool. Now, there are some new things in Spring Security which actually can help us improve our lives a bit. One of them is templating meta annotation expressions. That's a heavy word. So basically it means that I can define an annotation that then I can use to access a certain claim from my JWT token. Well, from my principal, which can be anything, but in this situation we're talking about OAuth, so we're going to be talking about what I want to access from the token that I'm getting, right? And basically, if I copy paste this for the sake of time, let's go to hello controller, and I define here all these things. Yes, let's go. Yes. Right. So I'm saying that in my, let's have a look at the JWT token, right? So in the attributes, which are basically all the things that you see here in the payload, I want to access the claim called claim. And claim is actually a parameter of this interface, of this annotation here, right? So then I can use it, for example, in my controller call here. So I can say user claim equals, sub. And this should be the username in this situation. What did I do here? I didn't put a comma. There we go. So if I can log it, I can print it, I can do whatever I want, I can return the authorities, whatever. But when I run this, and I call, for example, this is in get roles, I get a 500. Oh my god. Property or field attributes cannot be found on type JWT. Oh no. What did I do wrong? Let me have a look. Because it's trying basically using spell, right? It's trying to access attributes inside JWT, and JWT, it doesn't have any attributes, right? That sucks. Let's roll back nicely to see what's going on here, because the demo code never lies. Yeah, okay. Okay, this is a bit further on down the path, but we can use that. Where did I put the claim? I copied the wrong thing, sorry for that. Now, back to this. then in my controller, I can just configure it to get my user. For some reason, I did something wrong here, and the demo effect has just occurred. But you can trust me on this. You can trust me on the fact that this is supposed to actually access the claim in the right place in your token, right? And then you can actually use it. By default, it's sub. The sub is the username. That's what you could expect in your application. But it could be something else. I think it might be also because I upgraded the Spring Boot version. Shame on me. Minor versions that broke everything. Let's just nicely go back to what it was before. Now, another interesting thing that you can do, which is really not documented in, well, yet, maybe in Spring Security 6.5 it's going to be documented properly. It's called expression-based JWT granted authorities converters, right? So basically, authorities, you map them from your token into a list of granted authorities that then they get put into your authentication object. You can override this by providing a bean. In this case, it's called JWT authentication converter. And you create a new one. And as the authorities converter, you actually use a spell expression parser saying, inside my object, I want to access resource access inside it. This is the notation basically to say access inside the map something. Access for my app, because this is the application that I'm actually running right now, the roles, right? And then I just set the converter and return it to be able to use it in my code further on. So if you look at the code, the security config that I have here, basically, you can see that it says, okay, parse raw this guy, and then set the converter here. So when I go to my get roles, and I log in again, of course. So let's say I'm Bob this time. When I'm Bob, I get, well, in this case, I get scope, right? But I can basically append something else there instead of scope. The default is scope, but you can put role in front of it if it's something that you use more, because then it actually works out of the box with @secured or @preauthorized and so on. So normal user is here, right? It goes into resource access, then it gets my app from resource access, and it accesses the roles that are here, this array. Which is quite cool, right? Because then you don't need to explicitly go into your object and get something out of it, because you can just use the spell expression parser, which is, by the way, not documented at all, like I was telling you. The way I found about it was from a pull request in the Spring project, right? So, and of course, the pull request includes 2 new files, 1 commit, 0 documentation, right? There's nothing written about this beautiful piece of software that was given to us. But it's there, and now you guys know about it as well. Yeah, so it's quite modular. Like the way you use it, you just, when you configure your filter chain, you basically say, okay, so once I know that it's a JWT, well, once I pass into the JWT configure the authentication converter, it's this bean, right? It's the bean that I just defined before. So quite powerful. You can, of course, play around and have more than one expression parser that you can use for different things. Maybe your roles are coming from 2 different sources. Maybe you want to do something with that. It's quite useful. It's quite a nice feature. And that was the demo about it. And now, let's talk a bit about user impersonation. It's quite tricky. User impersonation means I essentially become that person in my application, right? How many of you are actually doing something like this in your, let's say, production environments to make debugging easier and so on? Yeah, not that many, right? I mean, One of the reasons is it's hard. The other reason is maybe you don't want to become the users because you might see their personal data and so on, and then you get sued and you go out of business. But at CERN, we don't necessarily have those issues that much because, well, it's lots of internal tooling. If we see what they have access to, it's not the end of the world. And they, let's say, implicitly allow us to do that. And it's a tricky thing to do. If you're not doing Auth client, if you're doing Auth client, it's quite nice. You have a filter. It's called the user switch filter. Have you ever used it in Spring? Yeah, 2 people. Exactly. Another beautiful undocumented part of Spring security because there's not really a lot written about it. However, if you're in a resource server environment, so if you want to impersonate somebody in your microservices, let's say, like across your APIs and so on, or you have a single page application, then you're screwed, then you're damned, right? Like you can't really do all of that, let's say, easy stuff. And why would you do it? For legacy and user support. This is like a super old, ugly Grails application that is used to schedule people visiting CERN. It's being replaced right now with a nicer, not so ugly one. But yes, when you have legacy applications, you don't want to, I mean, it's nice to be able to be that person because maybe the knowledge was lost many years ago on how actually things work or why they work, right? So maybe let's just be that person, see what they see. It's going to make our lives easier, especially when doing support. So you take out the Spring documentation on how to use the resource server. And there's a very nice diagram there saying, OK, you get the bearer token, which is an authentication token. The manager uses it and so on. And then it uses something called the JWT authentication provider together with the decoder and the authentication converter. The decoder is basically, it takes the string, the base64 encoded string, right? And it turns it into some Java object that's actually useful and you can actually use in your work, right? And then there's this JWT authentication converter object, which basically says, OK, now that I have a generic object, I want to add these claims in different parts of my JWT object to be able to use it in the security context further on. So this is before you actually hit any of your methods in your code. And it works a bit like this, the way we figured out that user impersonation could be done quite easily, quite nicely. You have the humble web browser, and the person goes and does a token request for the credentials, and they get a JWT token, right? This is a single page application. You don't go through the backend. The auth is initiated by the front end. The backend doesn't know anything. It's stateless, right? And then something interesting happens. So in our situation, we set a cookie. You can do something else. You can put a header or whatever. And we say, OK, we want to log in as Alice. And we say this. Of course, in real life, you would verify that whoever said that I want to log in as somebody else has the rights to do so. And you do the request. The front end thinks it's still Alice or Bob or whoever was the person that logged in. Inside the API, you have this converter, which basically maps from JWT to abstract authentication token. This is basically the class that you need to implement, the interface that you need to implement. And you verify, OK, if the user is admin, then fetch the claims of that person because you know who that person is in your application, or you should assume you know who that person is in your application. And you create a new JWT authentication token that is used from that point onwards, saying, actually, I'm this person. So your backend is, it doesn't know that somebody else called, right? Because from the moment everything runs, as far as it's concerned, inside the token, you're Alice. You're not Bob anymore. And that's kind of it. There's one caveat, though. Since the front end doesn't know that you're impersonating anybody, I mean, of course, they can look at the cookie and say it's this and that. You might actually want to get the claims of that person to hide the different parts of the UI. For example, if they're not an admin, you don't want to show everything, right? So there's no easy way to fix this other than just providing a, let's say, who am I endpoint saying, look, these are your roles, these are your claims, and so on. And that's it. Because because it's the simplest thing that you can do. So let's see how we would actually implement this in a real-life environment. So if I'm going to my impersonation application here, I have a few things already set up as boilerplate, so I don't need to complicate my life too much. So I have a user claims record, which basically contains the sub-preferred username and name, a user role, which is empty, because I didn't use it, and then something which gets information from the Keycloak database, right? This is to not complicate my life too much. I'm just fetching information from Keycloak and putting it into the token when something happens, right? In the security config, I take the authorities, right? So I have this JWT authorities converter, and I have a filter chain, right? So normal stuff. Now, the way I want to implement it is basically saying, okay, I have a OAuth2 resource server with a JWT authentication converter, which is the thing that we need to implement ourselves, right? I have an empty class here, which basically is supposed to use all these things, right? That I want to use as a JWT authentication converter, right? So I say here JWT authentication converter. Yeah, I just inject it, right? Thank you, ChatGPT. And I need to implement one method, convert, right? The convert takes JWT, like a JWT object from OAuth2, and returns an abstract authentication token. So this is like a core Spring security thing, right? And I want it to, well, first I have something like, oh, wow, yeah. Let's not go, well, actually, maybe it's better to check if it's null and just return new JWT authentication token of this. So basically what happens here is I'm saying, okay, if I'm not logged in as anybody, like this is just doing some regex on the login as header that the cookie that I'm passing, right? If I'm not logged in as anybody, then just return the thing. Of course, in reality, you would be like, if username is not null and the user has a certain role that allows them to authenticate, then do something. But in this case, we're just gonna keep it simple, so yeah. Now, what do? Well, we get the roles, right? So DB roles, let's call them. Get roles for username, this guy, right? So I'm just getting, basically, I'm getting a list of strings that I put in my authorities, right? And then I need to build a new token, which is basically all the claims that I have in the token that I got as a parameter, plus some things that I got from the DB, right? So in this situation, for brevity and to simplify life, you see it's quite verbose. But basically, you can say this, right? So you can say token is JWT with token value, the token that I actually got, because we don't care. Once we parsed it, we don't really care about the string contents anymore. We take all the headers, and then we put all the claims as well, right? I mean, this is basically a copy, what the beautiful AI auto-completion tool gave me. This one is copying the source token and putting it into a new one. And then what you can do is like, sorry. What you can do here is you return this, but instead of using the source token, you use the new token, right? I assume I wrote the right thing. Wait just a second. Yes, okay, and who the new guy is, like username, the new person. Right, but actually, in reality, we don't want to copy blindly everything. We want to add some things. So you put all the claims and whatever came from, well, from the DB in this situation, but it can be from wherever you guys want to get it. You set them as different claims inside the JWT token, right? So you take a copy, you change only what you need. So preferred username, name, whether the thing was impersonated or not, and resource access. You map it exactly to the way that you're supposed to have the JWT token. Why? Because then you have in your security config, you have this beautiful thing, right? Which basically evaluates the spell expression on the new object, not on whatever you got as a parameter, right? Okay, so this is it. And in my security config, actually, you see that I'm just injecting it and using it. So let's see what happens in reality. This is still a resource server type of application, right? So there's not much magic going on here. We're going to go through the Swagger UI. Because parameter 1 of could not be found. Okay, we inject the explicit object. Fine. Let's go like that. Okay. So Swagger UI. Maybe I put it. Maybe this one is. Or I didn't set up a Swagger UI for this one. It doesn't matter because we have a front end actually. So if I go to localhost.cern.ch 3000 because I'm setting the cookie on. Yeah, it's okay. It's not logged in now. Let's say I'm Alice. So my application is doing a super simple thing. It's just showing me what's inside the token that I have in the front end. And it's getting the roles from the backend, saying, OK, my roles are role admin and role normal user. And the server thinks I am, and then I implemented like a super dumb who am I endpoint, right? So the server replies with, maybe I copied the wrong claims from I think it copied something else, never mind. But the idea is it says sub this, preferred username Alice, name Alice, right? And my roles, they're from the backend actually. So the backend is replying with the roles that my person has, right? I also have a secure endpoint which basically verifies that I have the role admin, right? So if I go to localhost 8000 secure, sorry, it's secure. It's hello secure, yeah. Wait a second. Maybe that's API. Right. 401. Well, that's also because I'm not explicitly passing the token. But if I would take this token and just do a call to it, it would reply with, OK, it's fine, because you're Alice and you're also an admin. Now, assuming that I'm not Alice, so I go to this one here, and I say, OK, and now I'm Bob. The server thinks I'm Bob, and so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to set this magical cookie that I was talking about. That's why I'm on localhost.cern.ch, because I'm just setting up something. This is one of my colleagues. I'm just going to replace this with Alice for the sake of the demo. When I log in, what happens here? So my backend checks the token. It says it checks the header, the AI login as here, and it says, OK, this is the username that I should be. Now, I'm Bob in the front end. In the back end, when I get my roles from the token, surprise, I get admin back as well, right? Why? Because the backend now thinks that I'm Alice. The server, like when I ask the who am I endpoint, who am I? It says I'm Alice. But actually, the front end thinks it's Bob, right? So basically, what we did, we basically impersonated somebody here. If I delete the cookie and refresh the page, I'm back to being Bob again, right? So I didn't need to do anything magical here, right? And this is quite powerful. This is quite useful. We do it quite a lot in different production applications that we have around in the group at CERN. And it provides us with like a streamlined platform to make sure that all of these things, they work in the same way. So all of our applications, they're more or less configured in the same way. We built our own small library for this that you just pull into whenever you're running the services that we have. And that's it. Let me go back to the presentation. We have a couple of minutes left. You can get the code again, like I was saying, from this beautiful QR code. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on various social medias. If you want to mail me, you can also do that. And if you have any questions, we still have a couple of minutes where I can maybe answer any of your concerns. And thank you very much for attending the talk.